In a small coastal town where the ocean whispered secrets to those who listened, there lived a woman known for her kindness and quiet strength. She wasn't famous or wealthy, just an ordinary person doing extraordinary things in her own way. People often said she had a heart bigger than the sea itself. Little did they know how true that statement would become. One stormy evening, the kind where rain lashes against windows and thunder growls like an angry beast, the phone rang at the local clinic. A car accident had been reported on the outskirts of town. The roads were slick with rain and visibility was almost non-existent. Most people wouldn't have dared step outside, but this woman didn't hesitate. She grabbed her medical bag, pulled on her raincoat, and headed out into the chaos. The drive felt endless, every turn revealing more sheets of rain. By the time she reached the scene, emergency lights flickered weakly through the downpour. A group of bystanders huddled under umbrellas, their faces pale with shock. In the middle of it all lay a crumpled car, half submerged in a ditch filling rapidly with water. Time was running out. Without thinking twice, she waded into the rising floodwaters. Her boots sank into the mud and the cold soaked through her clothes, but none of that mattered. Inside the vehicle, slumped over the steering wheel, was a man barely conscious, his face streaked with blood. His breathing was shallow, and panic clawed at her chest as she realized the water level inside the car was climbing fast. Summoning every ounce of courage, she managed to pry open the door. The current fought back, pulling at her arms and legs. But she refused to give up. With adrenaline coursing through her veins, she somehow dragged the injured man out of the wreckage just moments before the car disappeared beneath the surface. Exhausted and drenched, she collapsed onto the muddy ground, clutching him close as paramedics rushed to take over. That night, no one could have guessed how much their lives were about to change. Not the rescuer, not the rescued, and certainly not the tiny coastal town watching from afar. For now, though, the focus was solely on survival. The man, once stable enough to talk, learned the identity of the person who had saved him. He was a scientist, someone whose work took him far beyond the confines of this sleepy little place. Yet here he was, indebted to a stranger whose name he'd never heard before. As days turned into weeks, he began to recover, but recovery wasn't easy. The injuries he sustained left him bedridden, frustrated, and battling waves of guilt over surviving when others might not have been so lucky. During these dark days, the woman visited him regularly, bringing food, medicine, and words of encouragement. At first, their conversations were brief, limited to practical matters like medication schedules and physical therapy exercises. But slowly, something shifted. He started opening up about his life, his travels, his research, his dreams of making the world a better place. She listened intently, asking questions that showed genuine interest. And in return, she shared bits of her own story. Growing up in the town, losing loved ones too soon, finding purpose in helping others. Their worlds couldn't have been more different, yet they found common ground in their shared humanity. Over time, gratitude blossomed into admiration, and admiration into something deeper. They weren't just patient and caregiver anymore. They were two souls bound by fate and circumstance. Even as his health improved, neither wanted to let go of the connection they'd forged. It felt like destiny had intervened that stormy night, weaving their paths together in ways neither could have anticipated. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. Just when happiness seemed within reach, tragedy struck again, altering the course of their journey forever. What happened next would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, loss, and legacy. But for now, amidst the uncertainty, one thing remained clear. The woman who braved the storm to save a stranger's life had set something remarkable in motion, a story that would ripple across generations. shaping not only her future but the futures of countless others yet to come. As the days stretched into months, the bond between the rescuer and the rescued grew stronger. The man, still recovering from his injuries, found himself looking forward to her visits more than anything else. Her presence was like a balm, soothing not just his physical wounds but also the invisible scars left behind by the accident. She had this way of making him feel seen, like he wasn't just another patient or someone who needed help, but a person with dreams, fears, and a story worth telling. For her part, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. There was something about the way he spoke, his voice filled with passion when he talked about his work, his eyes lighting up as he described the wonders of the ocean. It was clear that his heart belonged to something much bigger than himself. He wasn't just a scientist. He was a dreamer, someone who believed in making the world better, even if it meant working tirelessly behind the scenes. And though their lives were worlds apart, she admired that about him deeply. Their connection deepened naturally without either of them forcing it. Conversations flowed easily, moving from lighthearted stories to deeper reflections on life. They laughed over silly things, like his attempts to explain complicated scientific terms to her, which usually ended in both of them giggling at how lost they'd gotten in translation. But they also shared quiet moments, sitting side by side as he processed the weight of what had happened to him. She never pushed him to talk, but she was always there, ready to listen whenever he needed. It wasn't long before their feelings for each other became impossible to ignore. For her, it was the little things, the way he smiled when she walked into the room, the gratitude in his voice every time she helped him with something, the genuine interest he showed in her life. For him, it was her unwavering kindness, her strength, and the way she made him believe that maybe, just maybe, he could start over after everything he'd been through. Love crept up on them slowly, like the tide coming in, until one day they realized it had already taken hold. When he finally told her how he felt, it was during one of their evening talks. The sun was setting outside, casting golden light across the room. His words were simple but heartfelt. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I can't imagine my life without you anymore." Her response was just as sincere. "You saved me too," she said softly, surprising even herself. "Before you, I didn't think I could care about anyone this much again." They decided to take things slow, knowing that their relationship was built on unusual circumstances. But the more time they spent together, the clearer it became that they were meant to be. Their differences weren't obstacles, they were strengths. Where one lacked knowledge or experience, the other stepped in to fill the gap. Together they created a balance neither had found on their own. A year later, surrounded by close friends and family, they exchanged vows in a small ceremony by the sea. The waves crashed gently against the shore as they promised to stand by each other through thick and thin. It was a humble affair, nothing fancy, but it felt perfect. As they danced under the stars that night, wrapped in each other's arms, it seemed like nothing could ever come between them. But life has a way of reminding us that happiness is fragile. Just a few months after their wedding, she discovered she was pregnant. The news brought tears of joy to both their eyes. They began dreaming of the future, a child who would grow up learning from both of them, inheriting her compassion and his curiosity about the world. They imagined late-night conversations about the stars, weekend trips to explore tide pools, and bedtime stories that blended science with imagination. Everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. On the day their daughter was born, the unthinkable happened. After holding his newborn baby for the first time and whispering promises of love into her tiny ear, he collapsed. The medical team rushed in, trying desperately to save him, but it was too late. A sudden heart attack took him away, leaving her alone with a newborn and a shattered heart. The grief hit her like a tidal wave. For weeks, she barely slept, barely 8. Every corner of their home reminded her of him, the books he loved, the notes he'd scribbled in the margins, the sound of his laughter echoing in her memory. Friends and family tried to comfort her, but no words could ease the ache of losing the person she loved most. Yet amidst the pain, something inside her stirred. She remembered the promises they'd made to each other, not just in marriage, but in life. They had dreamed of creating a legacy, of leaving the world better than they found it. Now it was up to her to carry that dream forward for him, for their daughter, and for everyone whose lives they hoped to touch. With a heavy heart but fierce determination, she vowed to honor his memory. She would raise their daughter to know the father she never got to meet, to understand the importance of kindness, resilience, and protecting the natural world he loved so dearly. And she would continue the work he had started, even if it meant stepping far outside her comfort zone. In those early days of widowhood, she often sat by the window, cradling her baby girl and staring out at the horizon. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, vast and unpredictable, much like the journey ahead. But as the waves rolled in, one after another, she found solace in their rhythm. Life, like the sea, was full of storms and calm waters, highs and lows. And though she couldn't control what lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't let his legacy fade. Not while she still had breath in her body. Little did she know, the hardest battles and the greatest victories were yet to come. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and the overwhelming weight of grief. But amidst the chaos of caring for a newborn alone, she made a decision that would shape the rest of her life. She wasn't just going to survive, she was going to thrive. And more importantly, she was going to keep his dream alive. His dream had been simple yet profound: to protect the fragile ecosystems of the ocean, particularly the endangered sea turtles he had spent years studying. He believed these creatures were a symbol of resilience, surviving against all odds in a world that often seemed determined to destroy them. Now, it was her turn to pick up where he left off. At first, the task felt impossible. She didn't have a degree in marine biology or any formal training in conservation work. All she had were his notebooks, filled with scribbled observations, sketches of turtle tracks, and detailed maps of nesting sites along the coastline. She spent hours poring over those pages, trying to make sense of the jargon and diagrams. It was daunting, but she refused to give up. Every time doubt crept in, she reminded herself why she was doing this: for him, for their daughter, and for the future they had dreamed of together. Her first step was reaching out to the people he used to work with. At first, they were skeptical. How could someone without scientific credentials possibly carry on such complex work? But when they saw the determination in her eyes and heard the stories of how much this mission meant to her, something shifted. One by one, they began offering guidance, explaining terms she didn't understand, teaching her how to identify different species of turtles, and showing her the importance of monitoring nests to ensure the eggs hatched safely. She threw herself into the work with everything she had. During the day, she juggled parenting duties, feeding her baby girl, soothing her cries, and finding moments to study the material she'd gathered. At night, after the baby fell asleep, she read books on marine biology, watched documentaries, and scoured the internet for information. Slowly but surely, she started piecing together the puzzle. One of her biggest challenges was getting the community involved. She knew she couldn't do this alone. It would take a collective effort to make a real difference. So she began organizing small meetings at the local library, inviting anyone who was interested to learn about sea turtles and their role in the ecosystem. At first, only a handful of people showed up: a few curious kids, some retired teachers, and a couple of fishermen who were skeptical but willing to listen. But she didn't let the low turnout discourage her. Instead, she poured her heart into those early gatherings, sharing not just facts and figures but also personal stories. She talked about how her late husband had dedicated his life to protecting these creatures, how he had seen firsthand the impact of pollution and habitat destruction. She spoke about the joy of watching hatchlings scramble toward the ocean, their tiny flippers leaving imprints in the sand. And most importantly, she shared her own journey, the struggles of stepping into unfamiliar territory, the fear of failure, and the hope that kept her going. Her honesty resonated with people. They saw themselves in her story, recognized the courage it took to keep moving forward despite the odds. Before long, word spread and more people started showing up. Parents brought their children, schools organized field trips, and even local businesses pitched in, donating supplies or sponsoring events. What began as a small group of volunteers quickly grew into a movement. Together, they started patrolling the beaches at night, searching for signs of turtle activity. She taught them how to spot tracks in the sand, identify nests, and carefully relocate eggs if they were in danger of being washed away by high tides. Watching the volunteers light up with excitement every time they found a nest or released a batch of hatchlings into the ocean filled her with pride. This wasn't just about saving turtles anymore. It was about building connections, fostering a sense of purpose, and reminding everyone that even the smallest actions could make a big difference. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were setbacks, nests destroyed by storms, equipment failures, disagreements among team members. Some nights, she went home exhausted and frustrated, wondering if she was cut out for this kind of work. But then she'd look at her daughter, now old enough to toddle around and mimic her movements, and find renewed strength. Her little girl was growing up surrounded by stories of her father's passion and her mother's perseverance. Even at such a young age, she seemed to understand the importance of what they were doing, clapping her hands in delight whenever she saw pictures of turtles or heard her mom talk about the ocean dot as the months turned into years. The project gained momentum. More volunteers joined, including teenagers who had grown up hearing about the initiative and wanted to contribute. Local schools incorporated lessons about marine conservation into their curriculum, using the data collected by the group to teach students about science and environmental stewardship. The once skeptical fishermen became some of their strongest allies, helping patrol the waters and reporting illegal activities like poaching or dumping waste. Through it all, she remained the driving force behind the effort. People admired her, not just for her knowledge, which had grown exponentially, but for her unwavering dedication. She never sought recognition or praise. Her focus was always on the work itself. Yet quietly, her reputation began to spread beyond the town. Journalists wrote articles about the grassroots movement led by a grieving widow turned unlikely hero. Environmental organizations reached out, offering support and resources. Even government officials took notice, praising her efforts and promising to allocate funds for further research and protection measures. Despite the growing attention, she stayed grounded. For her, this wasn't about fame or accolades. It was about honoring the man she loved and ensuring that his legacy lived on. Every time she stood on the beach, watching the sun rise over the horizon, she felt his presence beside her. She imagined him smiling, proud of what they had accomplished together. And though the road ahead was still long, she no longer felt afraid. The community she had built was strong, united by a shared vision of a better future. Together, they were proving that love, determination, and teamwork could overcome even the greatest challenges. Little did she know, however, that the hardest battle was yet to come, and it would test everything she had worked so hard to achieve. The movement she had built was gaining momentum, but with growth came new challenges. The more attention their efforts received, the more scrutiny they faced. Some people admired what they were doing, calling it inspiring and groundbreaking. Others weren't so kind. Critics dismissed her as an amateur who didn't belong in the world of conservation, questioning whether someone without formal training could truly make a difference. At first, the negativity stung, but she quickly learned to brush it off. She knew better than anyone that passion and hard work mattered far more than credentials. Still, the hardest test came when a major corporation announced plans to build a luxury resort right on one of the most critical nesting sites along the Bnefana coast. The news hit like a punch to the gut. This particular stretch of beach wasn't just important, it was sacred. It was where her late husband had conducted much of his research, where countless turtles had laid their eggs over the years, and where she had spent countless nights patrolling with volunteers. If the resort went ahead, it would spell disaster for the fragile ecosystem. At first, she felt powerless. How could a small group of volunteers stand up to a massive company with deep pockets and powerful connections? But then she remembered something her husband used to say, "Change starts with courage." So she decided to fight not just for the turtles, but for everything they represented: resilience, hope, and the belief that even the smallest creatures deserved a chance to survive. She rallied the community, holding emergency meetings to discuss strategy. People poured into the room: volunteers, teachers, students, fishermen, even tourists who had heard about the project during their visits. The energy was electric, a mix of anger, determination, and fear. She stood at the front, clutching a stack of papers filled with data they had collected over the years. Her voice trembled slightly as she began speaking, but soon it grew steady, fueled by conviction. "This isn't just about turtles," she said, looking out at the crowd. "It's about us. About leaving behind a world we can be proud of. These animals have been here long before any of us, and if we don't protect them now, future generations will never forgive us." Her words struck a chord. Everyone nodded, murmuring agreement. They knew this battle wouldn't be easy, but they also knew they couldn't back down. Together, they came up with a plan. First, they gathered evidence photos of nests, maps showing migration patterns, and studies proving how vital the area was to the survival of the species. Then, they reached out to environmental organizations, lawyers, and activists, asking for help in building a case against the development. Meanwhile, she took the fight public. She gave interviews to local newspapers and radio stations, explaining why the nesting site was so important. She wrote letters to city officials, pleading with them to reconsider. She even organized protests, marching alongside hundreds of supporters through the streets of the town, holding signs that read, "Save our turtles" and "Protect what matters." Children joined in too, drawing pictures of turtles and handing them out to passers-by. The opposition fought back hard. The corporation launched its own campaign, promising jobs and economic growth if the resort was built. They argued that progress couldn't come to a halt just for a few animals. For a while, it seemed like their message might win out. Some townspeople wavered, tempted by the promise of prosperity. But she refused to give up. She reminded everyone that true progress wasn't about sacrificing nature, it was about finding ways to coexist with it. One pivotal moment came when she presented her case at a town hall meeting. Standing in front of a packed auditorium, she spoke not just as a leader but as a mother. She talked about her daughter, now old enough to understand the stakes. "I want my child to grow up in a world where we value life, all life," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Not just ours, but the turtles, the birds, the fish. We owe it to them to do better." Her sincerity moved people. Even those who had initially supported the resort began to rethink their stance. The turning point, however, came when a team of experts from a national conservation organization reviewed their data and publicly backed their cause. Their findings confirmed what she and her team had been saying all along. The nesting site was irreplaceable, and building a resort there would devastate the turtle population. With mounting pressure from both the community and outside groups, the city council finally relented. In a unanimous vote, they rejected the corporation's proposal and declared the area a protected zone. Cheers erupted in the room as tears streamed down her face. It was a victory not just for her, but for everyone who had believed in the cause. But the celebration didn't last long. Running the initiative was expensive, and funding remained a constant struggle. To keep things afloat, she returned to her old job as a nurse, working long shifts at the clinic while juggling her responsibilities with the project. Exhaustion became her constant companion, but she refused to slow down. Every time she felt overwhelmed, she thought about the turtles, her daughter, and the man whose legacy she was fighting to preserve. Despite the challenges, the victories kept coming. Schools across the region started incorporating their story into lesson plans, teaching kids about the importance of protecting wildlife. Volunteers continued to flock to the beaches, eager to contribute. And slowly but surely, the turtle population began to recover. Nesting numbers increased year after year, a testament to their hard work. Her dedication earned recognition beyond the town. One day, she received a letter inviting her to accept an award from a prestigious environmental organization. At first, she hesitated. Attending the ceremony meant traveling far from home, something she rarely did. But then she realized this was an opportunity to share their story on a larger stage, to inspire others to take action in their own communities. On the night of the event, she stood nervously on stage, clutching the award in her hands. The room was filled with scientists, activists, and policymakers, all clapping and cheering. When the applause died down, she cleared her throat and began to speak. "I didn't set out to change the world," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I just wanted to honor someone I love deeply. He taught me that every living thing has value, no matter how small. And he showed me that even when life feels impossible, you can find strength and purpose. This isn't my victory, it belongs to everyone who has ever cared enough to make a difference." As she stepped off the stage, surrounded by strangers congratulating her, she felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been beautiful. Through it all, she had discovered a strength she never knew. She had proven that love and determination could move mountains. Back home, life returned to its usual rhythm. She continued leading patrols, mentoring young volunteers, and advocating for the environment. Her daughter, now a curious and compassionate child, often tagged along, asking endless questions about the turtles and the ocean. Watching her daughter grow up immersed in the same values her father had cherished filled her with gratitude. Though he was gone, his spirit lived on, not just in the thriving ecosystem they had worked so hard to protect, but in the hearts of everyone whose lives they had touched. Little did she know, the next chapter of their story was about to unfold, a chapter that would bring unexpected joy, new challenges, and a reminder that legacies are meant to be shared.